Okay, so we're going to get started today. I actually didn't make copies because essentially all that the assignment or the exercise tells you to do is to follow these two tutorials. And there's some extra wording on it, but it's all repetitive. So we're going to be doing two things. If you just go to the assembly 10.3, that's the best one to go to. So it's at the very bottom here, 10.3. And when I get to the assemblies, part of the reason that I call them assemblies is they're combining different software packages. So today we're going to work in SketchUp and Photoshop, and we're going to combine those two pieces together. The good news for you is that it's all written out and step by step with lots of images that will help walk you through exactly what you're creating. Bad news is it's fairly long, both for me to walk you through verbally and also to kind of follow along with. A couple quick notes. I'm trying out something different. I did this in my Rhino class on Monday. When I record the videos, I always have a little like a little yellow circle that helps you see where the mouse is. And of course now it'll show up better when I'm of course it doesn't show up there anyway. Maybe I'll have to darken it up. It shows up really nice in Rhino. There's the yellow circle to help you follow what I'm doing on the screen. I also installed a key capture thing. That gray box at the bottom will show whatever I type. So if I end up typing something or holding down something, you know, something like that, it'll show up there, whatever I type. So I'm trying that out. We'll see how it works, but it's meant to kind of help you guys out a little bit. So you can see what it is that I'm doing. Looks like the yellow is not showing up the best. This is one of those things where we learn along the way. Can you guys see that a little bit? Yeah, that's better. I have to learn what the settings are so that I can sort that out. Okay, so what I have here is I have the SketchUp file of my cabin. Most of you have gotten at least a ways on it. Unfortunately, because of the shortness of the semester, we're stuck where we can only do 2 of the 4 that I wanted to do. I'm trying to cherry pick the ones that I think are the best. So we're going to do the section today, and we'll do the perspective on Monday, and then we'll have our final where you guys turn in your portfolio on Wednesday. So there's not a lot of time left. And so while I would have liked to have spent more time, I would have liked you to had more time to work through this. It is what it is, and we're going to have to work through it. I'm going to talk today about sections in SketchUp. I think it's really important to start to think in SketchUp. You guys, as young designers, will learn that while we spend most of our time in plan is not an experiential thing. It's a space planning. You know, how many square feet is something, how big is something, but how we experience the world is through section. We understand what the dimensions are of a room, not by the floor area, but by the height and the length and the width. And that's what we see in a section. And so sections are these really interesting drawings that really don't help normal people, but they really help designers to understand what's going on in a space. And that's critical for you guys to get used to. So that's part of why I'm picking a section in the first place. So we're going to use a tool in SketchUp that is called the section tool, or the section plane tool. I'm going to get to it by opening up my large tool set, which doesn't open by default on these computers. So I'm going to have to go to the View menu and then choose Toolbars. And from here, I will check the box for Large Tool Set. And I'll see the large tool set on the left side over here. And once that appears, if we scroll all the way down to the bottom right corner of that large tool set, we see something called the Section Plane tool. And so the Section Plane tool, when I click on it, it will let us name our section plane. And so we'll call it Section 4. And then as I move the section plane around my drawing, it's going to allow me to align to the various surfaces that I have in my building. SketchUp works great for orthogonal right angle type buildings, and you've probably already discovered this. When you start to have curves, it gets a little bit more challenging. If you have a curve and you end up needing to cut a straight section through that curve, sometimes it's helpful to give yourself a little cheater object, just a little square, to basically help you determine which plane you want to create your section in the first place. So in terms of creating a section, I am actually going to take a section. This front is well developed or well modeled. The back of my building is not. So I'm not going to take a section looking toward the back of the building because I would just get blank walls. It's not very exciting. So when I take my section, I want to be looking out toward the front here through these windows. So I'm going to flip around to the back side. I'm going to use that section tool. There it is. And I'm going to place that section along the back of my building somewhere. So we'll do it like that. And as soon as I place it into my scene, it allows me to kind of see into my building and see what I've cut through. I haven't quite cut in far enough, so what I can do is I can select my section plane. There it is right there. Let's see which one it is. 4. I apologize. I should delete a few of these. This file I've used for a couple years, so I have some extra section planes established. There we go. So we'll come back here. This is section 4. And I can use the move tool to actually move where this is in the building. So I can choose what it is that I'm cutting through in the building by just moving that section plane through the building. And so I'll have it cut through the hallway. We'll go right there because I think that's a more interesting place to cut through. Yeah, I think that'll work. So that'll be the section that I'm ultimately going to create right there. And so as I start to look at this section, even if I get down closer to eye level, you see right now that we're still in perspective. So the lines of my ceiling are all going toward a single point here on the horizon. So everything on this side is vanishing toward that point. Everything on this side is vanishing toward that point. So it's not really a true elevation. It's a sectional perspective still. It's a 1-point perspective rather than a 2-point perspective, but it is still a perspective, not an elevation view. So to switch that, we're going to go up to my camera. Sorry, under my, I always forget where they hide this. Yeah, it's under camera. I was right. And we're going to switch from perspective to parallel projection. And so I'm going to the camera menu, and I'm going to parallel projection. And when I do that, my view switches to at least be straight. Looks like I'm seeing the top of the roof because I'm not quite down level. Sometimes you need a little bit of help getting into the right view. In this case, go up to your camera, go to standard views, and it's going to be, I think for me it's going to be the back view. No, it's going to be the front view. So I'll go to camera, standard views, front. And there it is. Now I can see my section. I can see what I've cut through, and I'm seeing that as a line drawing. A couple things that the section plane also does before we do any exports is it puts kind of a gray haze on the whole screen. And to get rid of that, you would go into the View menu and you would turn off the section planes, which will get you back to having a white instead of a gray background. It's hard for you guys to see that on the projector screen, but you'll see it on your own when you turn it off. It does change the background. So at this point, we have to think about getting this file out of SketchUp and into something like Photoshop. So we can do some collage work on top of it, and we can make it look like a much better section than it currently is. And so I have a tutorial that's written up for how to do this, and I'm going to essentially be doing exactly that. It's right here under the SketchUp 4.4 Styles for Photoshop, which I have open. Oh, I should also point out that we do not have the Section Cut Face plugin installed on these computers. They didn't install it. So we're not going to use the Section Cut Face, so you can skip those first couple steps. OK, so I'm going to use this Styles for Photoshop. And this talks about how we're going to export our files here to get them into Photoshop. So once I'm here and I have this view established, I like this view, this is the one that I'm going to export, I'm going to go ahead and create a scene. And so I'm going to, on the default tray on the right side here, I'm going to expand the Scenes little drawer. And when I do that, I'm going to click on the plus sign next to where it says Scenes. And that's going to allow me to save this Scene 1. It's called Scene 1. If I were to highlight it and then scroll down, if my computer decides not to crash on me, I can right click on it and say rename scene. And so I could call this section. And mine happened to be called section 4, so I'll leave it set as section 4. And there it is. The advantage of a scene is that if I accidentally decide to move something, oops, I moved it around a little bit, I can double click on the section 4, and it will always take me right back to that view. So that's the good news, is it's a repetitive thing. I can come back to this view, and that will also make sure that all of my exports are in the correct placement, so they'll line up when I bring them into Photoshop. OK, so the next thing, now that I have the scene saved, is I'm going to go into my styles drawer right here, my styles tray. And in the styles tray, I'm going to go into my default styles, and I'm going to choose one that's called hidden line. And so once again, if I was here, I'd go into this drop-down menu, and I'd choose default styles, and then I'd choose hidden line. It's in the top row, it's the 5th one. And I'll click on that hidden line styles here. And with that, you see that things have changed a little bit. I need to make a few adjustments. I'm going to go up to my view menu, and I'm going to turn off my section cuts. Or excuse me, never mind. Sorry, wrong one. I'm going to turn off my section fill. There we go. And I'm going to turn off my axes. I'm going to turn off my guides. And I'm going to make sure that my section planes are also off. At this point, what I'm left with is just a basic line drawing. And this is the first one that I want to export. So I'll go from here, and I'll go to the File menu, and I'll go to Export. 2D Graphic is what I'm going to choose. When I pick 2D Graphic here, I'm going to go to my flash drive and put it into today's folder. This was, hold on, this is the wrong spot. We're on 228 today. And here is my section 4. And this is going to be an underscore lines after it. Now, before I click Export, I'm going to click on the Options button down here at the bottom. And the nice thing here is this is where it allows me to change the size of my export. And so by default, it's going to be the size of the view. But the truth is that that's not a particularly high resolution file. So we want to up that size a little bit. So I'm going to uncheck the Use View Size, and then I can manually type in a width or a height. I would say that the minimum here on whatever the smaller number is probably about 3,000. In SketchUp, you can go up to 99.99 unless they've changed that. Oh, no, they did change it. You can go higher than that now. So that's nice. But 3,000 will be enough. The truth is that the way we would calculate this out is we assume that printers print at 300 dots per inch. And so when we're picking resolution, we would say, how big is the final rendering, or how big is this going to be on my poster? I want it to be, for example, 10 inches. That would mean that I need 3,000 pixels. Does that make sense? So I'm multiplying it out. If it was going to be 20 inches, I would need 6,000 pixels. So that's how we kind of calculate out how big it should be. So 3,000 is a safe number. 10 inches is reasonable for what we're trying to do. I want to make sure that I'm all the way at the highest quality here. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And then I can go ahead and click on the Export button. And now that export has been made for me. So that was the first one, which was lines. Then we're going to continue on with a few other things. So that was the lines ones. The next one we're going to do is we're going to turn on the Xray button. And the truth is that in this particular view, it's not going to give us too much because we're already in section. If we were doing the elevation view, Xray would help us out. And so I'll show you it for the sake of showing it to you, but I don't think I'll actually export it because it's not going to show too much here. So under the Styles menu here, we're going to click from the Select to the Edit right here. And the very last button on the top row here is, I thought it was. Sorry. Click over one, which is the face settings. And then under Style, the last button here is Xray. And so the only thing that X-ray mode is really showing me is that there's some windows past this wall. It's not giving me too much. But if it was giving me something of value, I would, at this point, go to File and then Export 2D Graphic. And I would call this one X-ray. Well, there's always these things that happen. So much for my keystroke thing. Yeah, I get that it's not working. So I apologize for that. So we will call this section 4 X-ray. And I'll go ahead and click on Export. OK, so now I have the X-ray. We'll turn that one back off. And then I'll go back over and double check where I am. So I've done the X-ray. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do just the guides. I don't have a lot of guides, so I'm going to skip that one altogether. We'll move down, and the next one we want to look at are shadows. So I'm going to go to my view here. I'm going to go to the View menu, and I'm going to check the option here for shadows. Now, in this particular setup, there's not a whole lot that's going to happen when I turn on the shadows. There's a few shadows that are happening inside, but those shadows wouldn't actually be there because the rest of the building would be there. I don't have my building actually cut in half. So if I had shadows that were being cast on a surface that was outside of my building, that would be a valuable, let's say I had a tower that was over here and I had something shadow being cast on that, that would be a valuable shadow to have. In my particular case, there's not really any shadows that are valuable, but if I wanted to export the shadows, I would turn on the shadows like I did. I would come down into my edge settings here, and I would turn off edges, and that would give me just the shadows without all the extra lines, which is a good way of exporting it. It's really distracting to have them drilling or whatever they're doing outside. I apologize for that. But again, it's not giving me a whole lot in my particular view, so I'm going to skip the shadow export here as well. So I have that done. And then the last one are some of the styles that are available in SketchUp. So I'm going to go back up to the View menu. I'm going to turn off shadows, and I'm going to look on some of the other styles that are available. So I'll go back to the Select menu. And these are the styles that can end up being a little bit more casual, but can ultimately do some nice things in Photoshop. So I'm going to go down to the Sketchy Edges section. And when I've come to the Sketchy Edges section, there's a couple that I've found work nicely. The first one is Airbrush with Endpoints. This one here. So I'll click on Airbrush with Endpoints. I'll go up to View. I'm going to turn off Section Planes. I'm going to turn off Section Fill. And I'm going to turn off my guides. And my axes are already off. And this is a little bit more of a casual look. But when you layer it up in Photoshop, it can be a nice touch. So I'll go ahead and go to File and then Export 2D Graphic. And I will call this one Airbrush. And I'll click on Export. And the other one that I found that I like is something called Pen Gray. And you have to kind of look for it. There it is, Pen Gray. And I will again go back and turn off Section Planes. I'll turn off Section Fill. And I'll turn off Guides. And there's the Pen Gray version. A little bit more pencil-like. And I'll go ahead and go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. Now, don't feel like you're stuck using just the ones that I've done. If you would rather pick a different style and export it that way, that's OK. So let me call this one Pen Gray. And then I'll export. And the last thing that I would suggest doing is giving yourself I think it's available under the default styles here. Give yourself just a basic set of colors. So this simple style might be a good strategy, where we have a blue background, a green ground, and I'm once again going to turn off my Section Fill, my axes, and my guides. So I have this. This set of colored regions can be very helpful long term because we can do a color picker in Photoshop to select certain regions. So this is not something that I'm going to use directly. It's just something I'm going to use to help me select. To get rid of the lines that are in here so that we don't have too much of the black lines, I'm going to go to the Edit menu, and I'll turn off Edges and Profiles so I have just the colors. And I'll go ahead and go to File, and then Export 2D Graphic. And we can call this one just Color. And there we go. So at this point, I'm ready to just minimize SketchUp. I may need to come back to it a little bit later, but for right now, that's good. And I'm going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. And then I'll go ahead and go to the File menu, and I'll go to Open. And I'm going to start with just my lines version. So I'll go into my folder for today. And we were 128. And there we go. I'll start with the lines version, and I'll go ahead and say Open. And there it is. There's the lines version. It's a little bit lighter when you go to open it in Photoshop. That's to be expected. Then I'm going to go ahead and bring in the other drawings that I just exported. I'll go to the File menu and go to Place. And I might as well do a Place Embedded. That's fine. And we'll bring in, the next one was the Xray version. We'll go ahead and place that one in. And I'll confirm it by clicking the checkbox here. And then I'll go to File and then Place, Embedded. And I'll bring in, I don't know, we might as well bring in the color version. And I'll confirm. Go to File, Place Embedded. And we'll bring in that airbrush version. And we'll go to File, Place, Embedded. And we'll bring in the pen gray version as well. So all of these came in, and we can see over here that I have the pen gray, the airbrush, the color, the Xray, and the background. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on background and create a layer from the background so it's an actual layer, not a locked layer. And then I'm going to rename my layers. I'm going to end up creating probably 20 layers in Photoshop today, so keeping track of my layer names can be very, very valuable. So I'm going to go ahead and call this Lines. I'll call this next one Xray. Call the next one Color. Next one Airbrush. And the next one, we'll call it Pen Gray. Here we go. So I just reordered things, got my names correct. But I also want to be able to see through all of these various versions. So I'm going to take each one of my drawings, and I'm going to change them as I go down such that the blending mode is no longer normal, but multiply. So I'll move to each one, and I'll change the blending mode to multiply. The color one doesn't really matter because I'm not going to end up using it. I'm only using it for selections. So I'll go to the next one and choose multiply. I'll go to the last one, and that actually can stay solid for right now because it's the base level. And you can see that as soon as I do that, I can start with my first drawing, and I'll layer on the next one. It gets a little bit darker. I'll layer on the next one. It gets a little bit darker, and I'll layer on that last one, and it gets darker still. And suddenly this starts to look a little bit better just by layering those pieces up. So it's a subtle thing, but it can help. The next thing that I need to think through is I need to think about where the ground is in this view, and also what have I cut through, because that should show up as a darker color. So I'll start with what I cut through. So with the lines layer selected, I'm going to use the magic wand tool, which is available. It's the fourth one down. It's the magic wand tool. And I'm going to select inside of the areas that I've cut through. So I'm zooming in a little bit to see a little bit better. And I'll select inside here. I'll hold down Shift, and I'll keep selecting as I work my way around. If I were to turn off the other layers, I'm leaving them on to make it easier to see. You can actually see that it's a sharper line that I'm using with my selection. These are just for looks. I'll go ahead and continue. I'm holding down Shift, and I'm working through the pieces that I've cut through. All right, so that then cuts, that is all the pieces that I've cut through. And now it's time to fill those in. So I'm going to create a brand new layer. So I'll come down here and create a new layer. And I'm going to rename this to be Wall Fill for clarity purposes. And then I'll come over to my paintbrush tool. There's my paintbrush tool. And I will make sure my foreground color is black, which it currently is. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. So I can raise the size up. Remember, the other option would be to press the bracket keys on the keyboard, which is, to me, a little bit easier way of doing it. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill in all this that I just selected. Now, if down the road we decided we didn't want it to be black and we would rather have it in gray, we can do an adjustment layer on just this to change it from being in black to being in gray. We could also change it all the way to be white. So we've got flexibility after the fact. So now that that's done, I'll go ahead and click the rectangular marquee tool and make a single click so that it's all deselected. And now I can press Control 0 and we can see that, okay, we have a better understanding of what's actually been cut through on the building, which was the purpose of doing this in the first place. So now we need to create some kind of a ground for this particular building. And so this building is probably going to be set in a relatively flat setting. We don't have too much slope. And so I'm going to approximate that using my lasso selection tool. So it's this one here. And I'm essentially going to draw approximately where the ground would be. So it's going to be about like that. Oops. Sorry, I accidentally let go of the mouse. Yeah. There it is. If your hand is cramping as you start to create this, you can not do the whole thing at once. And then I'm going to work my way around the bottom here and back up to make a selection. I missed a little bit on this corner, so I'm going to hold down Shift and make sure that I select the whole corner like that. And so at this point, I'll create another layer. So let's go to create another new layer. And I will call this layer ground. And I'll go ahead and use the paintbrush tool again, and I'll paint that with black. Now when I deselect it, you can see that it's starting to feel like it belongs somewhere. It's sitting on something. Okay? So I can take this a step further. If this was in an area with grass or meadow, I can use the grass brush to make it feel even a little bit more rooted. So I'll press Control plus to zoom in a little bit. I'm going to use my clone stamp tool right here. And again, I'm going to be on the ground layer. I'm going to change my brush to be the grass brush, which of course they got rid of. So I need to come back to Legacy Brushes. There we go. There's my legacy brushes. And inside of there is my grass brush. Hold on. Let me make this a little bit bigger so I can see it easier. There's the legacy brushes. There we go. Let's see. No. I apologize, I don't know where this is. It's killing me. Huh. Well, I apologize for this because I can't seem to find it anywhere. Yeah, I'm in the default. I'm in the legacy brushes and the default brushes. Thank you for that. There it is, grass. Sorry. God. Okay, so I have the grass brush. Why they move stuff around. Okay, so now that I have the grass brush, I'm going to use the clone stamp. I'm going to copy from. I probably need to make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to copy from. I'm going to hold down Alt to copy from down here. And I'll come up here and start with my grass brush. Might have to adjust the size just a little bit. And I'll fill in some grass along the bottom there. And this softens the edge a bit and makes it a little bit more casual. Let me fill in that last little bit. Come over to the other side. I'll hold down Alt again. And we'll work this in there as well. Alt, click, and then I'll finish that up. Like that. Now if I press Control 0, we can see that I've added that grass. It feels like it's sitting in a meadow. It feels like it's sitting in some kind of a setting, and that's a good thing. So at this point, we need to bring in some kind of a backdrop. And so I may be doing this slightly out of order from the actual tutorial, but I'll get to all the steps. It's just whatever order is working for me. So when I start to think about a backdrop, I'm going to have to go find one. So I'll open up my browser. And I'm going to do a Creative Commons search. So I'll do search.creativecommons.org, which I apparently can't type. There we go. And I'm going to type in Yosemite. And I've had good luck with Meadow. Now, if this was an actual design project and you visited the site, you'd have photographs of the site. You could use those actual photographs. We don't have that, so we're going to rely on image search. And we're going to look for something that we can use as a backdrop. So something like this might work really nicely. And so one of the things I tend to do as I look through is I pick photos and I just right click and say open in new tab, and then I go back and have a look later on at which one really looks the best. I'm looking for images that don't have too close in the foreground. If, for example, I had one that, like this one, where I've got the rock there, I've got a problem because there's a person there too. But this would be difficult because where am I going to put my building and have it look like it belongs in this scene? It doesn't work. So I have to be careful and selective as I'm going through and trying to pick this. And the more time you spend finding the right image, the better off it's ultimately going to look. And sometimes it takes more than one as you work your way through it to decide which one really works. This one might work, but it has that stand of trees. We'll have to see if the scale ends up working out okay. I'll go ahead and download it. We're looking for the original size, so the large size of the image. And we'll download it there. And I'll show it in its folder. It's almost done. Perfect, there it is. I'll go ahead and copy it, and I'm going to then put it over into today's folder. And I'll go ahead and paste that in place right there. And it may take some of these other ones. I don't know which one just yet is going to work nicely, so I may end up downloading and saving a few other ones because I can try them out as well. So here's one, and we'll go ahead and copy this one. And same thing, we'll put it right here. I think the first one will probably work, but like I said, sometimes you have to collect more. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my Photoshop file right here. And I'm going to bring in, let me press Control minus here, I'm going to bring in that background. So I'll go to File and then Place. We'll go ahead and place Embedded again. And I'll bring in that first background file. And there it is. It's obviously way too small, so I'm going to hold down the Shift key to keep this in proportion and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So it obviously has to be big enough to cover up my drawing, but I also have to think about where it belongs. And I may find that changing the layer order such that this one is down further will be helpful. And so I'll just leave it here for right now. I'll commit to it. But then I'm going to put it below the ground layer so that I can start to see how this lines up with my scene. So I'll go back to the edit and then transform. We'll do free transform so that I can move this background. And there's a point at which it feels kind of natural. Like it feels like it belongs. Maybe it's right there-ish. We want to pay attention to the horizon line. This would be if it was a downslope. We'd get this view. That's always a little awkward. It looks funny to get it clipped. So I'm looking for something very close to the horizon. Maybe something along that line. Maybe slightly higher. Somewhere like that. Seems pretty reasonable. So now that I have this established, I can go ahead and commit to it. But notice that a large part of my image is actually getting clipped on the top. I can change that. I can go up to my image and then go to my canvas size. And when this comes up, the anchor point right here is which direction I want this to get a little bit larger. So if I change the anchor point to the bottom, it's just going to get larger to the top. It's not going to get larger at the bottom. And at that point, I can actually change the height. And we'll add some extra, let's say maybe 40 inches. And I'll say OK. And now suddenly I have more of that sky showing. I could go back in to my free transform, and I can see, oh yeah, I don't have too much of it left. So to me, that's a fairly reasonable decision. So I have the ground input. I have the background, but it's not cut out for my building just yet. So I have to work through cutting it out for my building. So let's go ahead and turn off, for the moment, that background. And I have to think about cutting out my building. This is where using that color version, this one, to make selections can be really helpful. So with the color layer active, I'm going to go to my magic wand tool and I'm going to select the blue. This is the outside of my building. I need to also add this upper part because that got, I don't have blue up there because I made my canvas a little bit bigger. And I'm also seeing through this piece a little bit. I'm also seeing through my windows. So let me go ahead and select those windows. OK, so I've selected all of those windows. I haven't selected the ground. With that selection made, I'm going to jump back to my background right here. There it is. And I can go ahead and click on the Add Layer Mask button. And when I do that, it's going to cut out for my building. So now the building feels like it has a background behind it. I haven't quite differentiated what's outside space versus what's window. So that'll be my next step, is how do I adjust what the windows look like. So you can see I'm building this up as I go along. So the next piece, I'm going to go back to that color version here, and I'm going to select just the windows. I'll again use the magic wand, and I'll select just the windows. Whoops, I have to be on the color layer. There we go. I'll hold down Shift, and I'll select all of the windows. There. And I'm doing just the windows, not what I can see through outside, not the background, just the windows. And with that made, I'm going to go ahead and create an adjustment layer. So I'll go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. And this, the strategy here is that I'm going to somehow change what the windows do to the background. So I'm going to adjust the windows to make the background more blue, for example. Or I could make it black and white versus color. Or there's a lot of flexibility here in terms of what I could do. So depending on which adjustment layer you pick, you're going to change it. So I'm going to do, we'll do a hue and saturation adjustment. I'll go ahead and say OK. There's my hue and saturation adjustment. I actually want it to be directly above my background. And I could rename this to be background photo as a way of keeping things a little bit more organized. Now on this hue and saturation layer, I want it to apply just to the background photo. So I'm going to press Control-Alt-G on the keyboard to tie this hue and saturation layer to the background photo layer only. And once that's the case, then I need to adjust the hue and saturation. So first off, I could adjust the color. So I could cause the color to change. And I'm making this extreme so you guys can kind of see how I'm changing the color. The other option, I'll go back to 0 here, is I could change the saturation. I can make it lighter, depending. I could also change the lightness, so I could darken or lighten the windows, depending. So those are 3 options in terms of how I can differentiate what are windows. I could do, as an alternate, I could do a channel mixer, and I could adjust it that way. So I've got a lot of flexibility. I'm going to go ahead and shift the color a little bit. Maybe about like that. I don't know whether you guys can see that on the projector or not. Yeah, it's a little bit different color. And so essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, this is different because I'm looking through glass versus the rest of the building where I'm not looking through glass. Okay? So I've made that a little bit of an adjustment. Now the other thing that sometimes happens inside the building is sometimes you want to add a photorealistic texture behind instead of having these white, for example, you want whatever the wall material would be. So I could go ahead and collage in some wall material. Easiest way of doing that is to use a tiling texture. I have some already on my flash drive, but you could do a Creative Commons search for there's wood tiling texture. And actually sometimes it works better to do a Google image search for the wood tiling texture. And essentially you could pick something with some wood in it. Do something like that, for example. And I could use that as a backdrop. Let me do, for this part, I'm more interested in just the color. The other thing you can do in Google is you can always say what size you want, which sometimes can be a little bit nice because you can increase the resolution. I'm just going to pick something basic, something like this. I'll use this for behind the windows. This one actually isn't going to tile for me, but it'll work. Let me go ahead and visit it. Of course, I have to log in. I'm going to use one of my own because that I've already downloaded. But you guys get the idea. Let me go to File and then Place Embedded. And you'll find over time that you have a tendency to keep this stuff around. So in my Resources folder, I have something called Collage. I have concrete there, so I could use concrete. I'll use concrete because I have it. And I could pick this as a concrete. It's a bunch of blocks. It needs to be sized correctly, so I'll make it a little bit smaller here. Maybe something like that. Now I want it to tile. I want multiple versions of it, so I'll go ahead and commit to it here. I'll select it using the rectangular marquee tool. I don't have to be too close to it. I just have to select it and be on the correct layer. And then I can go to Edit and then Copy and then Edit and Paste. And I'll get a second version of it that I can then move. Stop. There we go. And those two will seam together. I need to zoom in to see this a little bit better. One of the strategies here is frequently to use the arrow keys to help align things. Okay, so I have all of these pieces that I've tiled together. It actually looks like they need to be moved slightly closer together. Okay, so now I have all of those. I want all of these to end up on the same layer, so I'll select the first one here, I'll select the original one, and with all of those selected, I'm going to go up to Layer, and then Merge Layers, which will merge the ones that were selected into just one layer. So instead of multiples, I've compressed them together, and we will again call this one, we'll call this one Concrete. Perfect. And then I will use that, I can either use the colored region again, or I can use the lines region, depending. I'll turn everything off for a second so I can see just the lines. And I'm going to make my selection now. So this one's a little bit more difficult because I'm selecting the parts, make sure I'm on lines here. I'm selecting the parts that will have concrete. So I may need to zoom in a little bit. So those two will, this will, that will, this will, this will, and across the top here. And down that side like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. With those selections made, I'll turn back on the concrete layer, and I'll go ahead and click on the Add Layer Mask. I have to be on the concrete layer and then add the layer mask. There it is. And now that will be cut out for the places in the building where I have the concrete. So I'll go ahead and start turning back on other lines here. There we go. Like that. You may find that the concrete is oversaturated. It's too much color. You can, of course, make an adjustment on that. You can change the opacity. You can make it a little bit lighter if you want. The one other thing that I will show you for doing the interiors of this is sometimes it's useful to create some fake lighting. So we can create a layer for lighting. I'm going to go ahead and click on New Layer. And we'll call this new layer Interior Lighting. And this interior lighting layer, we're going to change our blending mode into something called Soft Light. So the interior lighting layer has a blending mode of Soft Light. I'm going to go over to my brush, and I'm going to make sure that my brush is a nice soft brush. So the hardness should be set to 0, which it is. The size I'm going to change so that it's a little bit smaller. And my foreground color, I'm going to pick a kind of a nice warm yellow. So maybe something like that. And now, when I move into this building, if I'm looking at this room and I wanted to create a fake light in here, I would start toward the ceiling with a small circle, like that, starting to create the light. I'd move slightly down, increase the brush size, and the further down I go, the more brush I would start to get. Repeat the process. Small there, move down a little bit, increase the brush size, increase the brush size, increase the brush size, etc. So as I did that, that was good, but it applied to the background. And I don't know whether you caught that it changed the background just a little bit as well. So if that's the case, I need to create a mask on this such that it's only the interior of the building. Let me turn back on that color selection. And I will click on my magic wand. I'm going to select, let me make sure I'm on the color region. I'm going to select the background. We'll do that and that. And then I'll go back to my interior lighting layer. I have to do an inverse of this selection, so let me select inverse. So I have just the building selected. I need to subtract out mistake. This plus this plus this. Select inverse. There we go. Now I have just the building selected. I'll go back to my interior lighting layer and click on the Add Layer Mask. And that will allow the light not to affect what's going on outside. It will only affect what's going on the inside. Oh, I needed to block out that window as well. So let me go back here. And we'll select these windows. I don't have lighting in the rest of this, so I don't really have to worry about it. But since I'm here, if I decided to add lighting later on, this would be the time to do it. So I'll go ahead and select them all. Let me go back to that interior lighting layer. We'll go back to my paintbrush, and we're going to paint in black to make sure that it's not going to affect that area as well. Oops. I have to be on my mask. That was a mistake. Paint in black. Eventually I'll get this right, I promise. Perfect. If I turn off the color, then we'd see it. And we can see that it hasn't applied the light where those windows are. So I have the light in here. You may find that that light is a little bit strong, in which case you can change the opacity down. For you guys on the projector, you need it high so you can see it, but I would ultimately probably turn it down to be a much fainter light, something like that, so you can just see a little bit of it in there. Okay, so I've worked my way through. I have my background, I have my lighting, I have the grass set. I'm seeing through where the windows are. I've differentiated what the windows look like versus what the background looks like. The next piece of this that's really important is to put a person in. People are always critical toward understanding what the design is. So we need a sense of scale. So I'm going to bring in a person. We've already cut out silhouettes, so this makes life real easy. I'll go to File and then Place Embedded. And I have my people. I have lots of people. And it may be nice just to put a silhouette of somebody in. So I could pick just the silhouette here. I could place that silhouette. We can drop this down a little bit so that's the correct size. It's probably about like that. I want to make sure, I'll go ahead and commit to it for right now. I want to make sure that she stands out just like the black stands out. So I'm going to do an adjustment layer on her. So I'll go up to my layer. I'll go to New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to do a Levels Adjustment. And I'm going to tie the Levels Adjustment just to the woman. So Control-Alt-G. There it is. And on that Levels Adjustment, right here, I'm going to change her to be black. So I'm just dragging the center of this from one side to the other. There she is in white, and there she is in black. And she's standing right there. I could move her around a little bit to decide where she belongs. I'll go back to my Move tool. And I can move her over here, for example. In this scenario, she's looking this way, which I think is a little bit awkward. So I might flip her. So I'll go to Transform, and I'm going to flip horizontal. So she's looking that way. You just have to kind of think about where she fits compositionally in the room. I can adjust her placement just a little bit with the arrow keys, maybe about like that. And then I can turn her back to being in black, like that. So we get a sense of scale, which is important. You could put somebody outside if you want, besides putting somebody inside. Obviously, you have to make sure that she's the right scale, she's the right height for your space. She might be a little bit tall right now, actually. So I can go back into my free transform, and I could shrink her down just a little bit more. Yeah, there you go. And then we'll turn all of this back on, except for the color. And so now we have a sense of scale as part of this whole setup. You guys see how I'm working through this? So I have the person in now. It looks pretty good. The last thing that I've found that some people like, and this is especially true when you're trying to put it on a big presentation board, is that if you have the full color background like this, it gets clipped at the top and suddenly you feel like you have this just static image. Sometimes you want the background to just kind of fade away so you can put a plan above it or whatever. So I like to walk through that process as well. If you want the top of this image to fade away, we're going to work on the background layer itself right here. We will also have to work with the mask a little bit more. So in the mask here, we're going to, at the very top, we're going to make a selection and then do a gradient with it. So I'm going to go back to my color. You can see that I use this color frequently just to make selections. So I'll select this part of the background, the upper part, plus that part right there. I'll turn it off, and then I'll move back down to the background layer right here. I'm going to move over onto the mask layer. And while I'm on the mask layer, I'm going to come to the gradient tool. And currently I have a foreground color of black and a background color of white. All I have to do is drag a line from the top here. This is where it's going to be completely transparent. Down toward the bottom, this is where it's going to be opaque again. So wherever that point is that you want it to be opaque, it'll be somewhere about there, and just let go. And it's going to fade out the top of the mountains into nothing. And I'm seeing the checkerboard pattern behind. If I had a white layer behind, we'd see a little bit more of it. Let me take this here and fill this in just so you can see it a little bit more instead of the checkerboard. Not essential for what I'm doing, but it will help you guys visualize it a little bit better. There it is. See how it's fading out to being just white? And that works nicely on a poster board because you don't have a sharp top edge. You can kind of fade it out from there as part of your overall look. So I'll go ahead and turn everything back on. And you can see the finished product. I'll press Control-0, and there's my finished product. Now some people find that the dark black section ends up being just too much, and they would rather have it as a much lighter section. We can go through and we can change that. We can go to our section cut, and there's our wall fill and also our ground. Where's our ground? Oh, there it is, our ground. And we can change both of those to white. So my wall fill, I'll add an adjustment layer. So I'll go to my layer, new adjustment layer. And it's going to be a levels adjustment. I'm going to tie these together, Control-Alt-G. Control-Alt-G, there we go. We'll tie the levels adjustment to the wall fill. And here, I can switch the wall fill from black over into white. Why is it not doing it? There it is. So that's now in white. Then I can use the same thing up on my ground layer. So I'll go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. Control-Alt-G to tie those two together, and I can make the ground into being white. And so this inverses it. I have to do a little cleanup because I've got lines that are showing through that I'm not going to want to have showing through, so that this just goes to white. But it's the inverse effect, where we have the bottom being all completely white. So in this case, I would have to go through and delete out all these extra lines at the bottom, just so that they don't impede with what I'm seeing. And that would take a little bit of extra time, but it's not something that you guys have to sit and watch me do. But I will finish it up so you can see both versions of it, the light version and the dark version. So I know it's a lot for you guys to take in one setting. I went through it rather quickly. The good news is that it is all written out with references. If you look at Assembly 10.3, it'll walk through all the different steps that I did. I think the only thing that I didn't do in this version was put a person in. And I think that actually was a mistake. I should have put a person in. It's always important to put a person in. But this will walk through basically all the various things that I've talked through. The other thing that I did different is I turned the background into black and white and kept color in where the windows are. It's just a different strategy. It looks slightly different. but it achieves the same result. Okay, so that's all there. What I'm looking for today is for you to post however far you get on your section. In previous semesters, this ended up being an assignment, so it was really important. It was one of the pieces of your assignment. Today, it's more exploring the skills and understanding what we're doing. Next class on Monday, we're going to do a perspective, and we'll collage in a perspective, so you'll see that whole process as well. If you want to see the plan and the elevation versions of how you would do the collage work for both the plans and the elevations, they are available in previous semesters, so you can watch those lectures. There are also tutorials under the assembly section here. You can see that we did sections today, but there's also elevations, and somewhere in here there's plans, so you can do those too as well if you want to kind of see what we ended up having to cut out of the semester. I think the one other thing that I'll say before I'll turn you guys loose to start working today is sometimes people ask me, why wouldn't I just always do this in Photoshop? Why would I go into Illustrator versus Photoshop? Because it's so much easier to do the collage work in Photoshop. And I'd like to tell you guys, so that you have an understanding of why they are different, the fundamental difference between working in Photoshop and working in Illustrator. And the difference here is that the drawing that I created today is not to scale. The end result is not something that I can say, this is a 1/4 inch equals a foot, and it's a scale drawing. It looks nice, and it looks good on a presentation board, but it has no scale assigned to it. If I create something in AutoCAD and I export that to a PDF file, and I take that PDF file into Illustrator, I've established that this particular drawing is at a 1/4 inch equals a foot, or an 1/8 inch equals a foot, or whatever the scale is, and therefore it is a specific scale. And so the fundamental difference between working in Photoshop and in Illustrator/AutoCAD is that there is no scale. I haven't assigned any scale to this. I've just taken a SketchUp model, I've made some images from it, and I've collaged over it to make it look good, but there is no scale assigned to it. If you want your SketchUp file to end up being, or if you want your Photoshop file to end up printing at a specific scale, I would bring the final version that we created today, this file, into your like Illustrator or InDesign, and do a scaling of that image based on the thickness of the roof or the thickness of a wall, and then it would start to become scaled at that point. But it would take some more steps to get this from being unscaled to being scaled. And so I like to kind of emphasize that as a point. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I will finish this up so you guys can see later on in the video what it looks like with the white background versus the black background of the section cut, just so that it's a little bit different. And so we'll go from there, and you guys are free to start working.